Lady Edwina Mountbatten was born into immense wealth, later married into royalty, and became involved in relationships that were both romantic and political, giving her life the feel of a dramatic novel rather than a simple biography. Behind the pearls, influence, and carefully staged press photographs, however, existed a woman motivated by curiosity, compassion, and controversy. This is not only a story about status and titles, it is a narrative shaped by love, loss, betrayal, and legacy. It is the untold story of Lady Edwina Mountbatten, the secret she guarded, the scandal she survived, and the woman she truly was. In 1901, as the Victorian era ended and a new century emerged filled with hope and ambition, a child was born who would eventually become one of Britain's most controversial and intriguing aristocrats. Her name was Edwina Cynthia Annette Ashley, a name that would later inspire admiration, fascination, and scandal in equal measure. From birth, she was surrounded by extraordinary privilege. She belonged to the Ashley family, part of Old English aristocracy, but it was not her father's background that truly shaped her destiny. Instead, it was the overwhelming influence of her maternal grandfather, Sir Ernest Cassel, that defined the world she entered. Sir Ernest was a self-made multimillionaire, a German-born Jewish banker who moved to Britain and rose to become one of the most powerful financial figures of his time. His clients included the future King Edward VII, and his reach extended deep into the heart of the British Empire. He was not only wealthy but also highly connected, strategic, and trusted by royalty. Among all his family, young Edwina was his favorite. After her mother died early in 1911, when Edwina was only 10, he took full responsibility for raising her. She grew up surrounded by luxury estates, elite social circles, and direct exposure to political power. His London mansion, Brook House on Park Lane, became her childhood home, filled with servants, art, luxury, and a deep sense of loneliness. Despite the wealth, her early life lacked emotional warmth. Her father, Wilfred Ashley, remarried, but Edwina never felt comfortable with her stepmother. Though she possessed money, prestige, and luxury, she was still a child longing for attention, stability, and love. Instead of withdrawing into loneliness, she developed traits that would define her personality: resilience, independence, and curiosity. She was intelligent, observant, and, despite her polished appearance, restless. As a teenager, she challenged rigid aristocratic traditions, read widely, embraced new ideas, and refused to be defined only by privilege. By age 18, she had already become one of London's most talked-about débutantes. She was tall, strikingly beautiful, and carried a rare self-confidence that attracted both men and women. Newspapers wrote about her not only because of her wealth, which was vast, but also because of her confidence and sharp wit. She was bold, fashionable, and slightly unpredictable. When Sir Ernest died in 1921, he left most of his massive estate, rumored to be worth tens of millions of pounds, to her. At only 20 years old, she became one of the richest women in Europe. Instead of living quietly, she became even more determined to shape her own destiny. She traveled widely, attended elite social gatherings, and interacted with diplomats, artists, and thinkers. Her wealth opened doors to Europe's most exclusive circles, but it was her personality that made her unforgettable. It was within this glittering post-Edwardian elite world that Lord Louis Mountbatten entered her life. He appeared to be the ideal match. Born into European royalty, a great-grandson of Queen Victoria and second cousin to both King George V and Tsar Nicholas II, he possessed noble blood and strong military ambition. Handsome, well-mannered, and naturally aristocratic in presence, he was also deeply driven by a desire for success, power, and a partner who could elevate his position. Edwina became that partner. Their short courtship quickly became the focus of London high society. It was more than a marriage of aristocratic heritage and financial power. It was a strategic union. In July 1922, Edwina Ashley and Lord Louis Mountbatten married in an extravagant ceremony rivaling royal weddings. The guest list included European nobility, political leaders, and members of the British royal family. The press celebrated the union of a wealthy heiress and a handsome naval officer. Yet beneath the grandeur were two ambitious, complicated individuals who may not have been emotionally compatible. Louis admired Edwina's intelligence and fortune but remained devoted to his naval career, which kept him away for long periods. Edwina entered marriage carrying unresolved grief and a deep fear of abandonment. Their early married life featured luxury travel, glamorous parties, and social success, but emotional fulfillment proved difficult. As Edwina searched for meaning beyond aristocratic expectations, Louis became more distant, and cracks appeared in the relationship. Before the scandals, before the lovers, before India or war, there was simply Edwina, a lonely girl turned dazzling heiress trying to find belonging in a world that gave her everything except emotional security. In 1922, at just 21, she stood at the center of attention. Her wedding to Louis took place at St. Margaret's Church before Britain's elite. Her dress was custom-made, her jewelry reflected Cassel family wealth, and newspapers praised the fairy tale couple. Publicly, it looked like a perfect union between wealth and royalty. Privately, it marked the beginning of one of high society's most emotionally complicated marriages. Louis, charming and ambitious, had been raised to succeed within the Royal Navy and in public life. Though he had status and royal blood, he lacked the financial resources needed for his ambitions, something Edwina provided. But Edwina also sought something from the marriage, possibly love, stability, or prestige through royal connection. On paper, it was a strategic and impressive partnership, but still vulnerable to human flaws. Early on, the couple traveled globally, visiting America, India, Japan, and Australia. They hosted grand parties, attended royal functions, and mixed with global elites. Yet Louis remained absorbed in naval duty, leaving Edwina feeling intellectually and emotionally unfulfilled. The idle role of a naval officer's wife soon felt suffocating to her. She tried to meet social expectations but needed purpose, meaning, and emotional closeness. As Louis spent long periods at sea, rumors of affairs began circulating in elite circles. At first dismissed as gossip, they gained credibility over time. She was linked to artists, diplomats, and even African-American jazz singer Leslie Hutchinson. In a highly segregated and class-conscious society, such rumors shocked even liberal aristocrats. Though tabloids avoided the story due to her influence, the scandal was widely whispered privately. Edwina refused to conform to social expectations and lived according to her own values. Meanwhile, Louis was also rumored to have romantic relationships, including possible relationships with men, though never officially confirmed. Publicly, he never addressed such claims. What is widely believed is that both tolerated each other's affairs, creating what many historians now view as an early form of open marriage, maintaining public unity while living emotionally separate lives. Despite this, they functioned effectively as a public partnership. They raised daughters Patricia and Pamela, attended royal events, supported charities, and maintained public respectability. A deep loyalty remained between them. They were not romantically in love as the public imagined, but they shared respect, emotional understanding, and a strong bond. Louis later described Edwina as a remarkable and deeply complex woman. They continued writing affectionate letters when apart, showing warmth and occasional tenderness, though rarely intense passion. They functioned more like strategic partners than traditional spouses, building a shared public legacy of diplomacy and social influence. Yet Edwina privately struggled with restlessness and emotional longing, as revealed in letters and journals published decades later. She was both admired socialite and deeply lonely individual. Edwina's complexity made her unforgettable. She lived by her own emotional instincts in a time when aristocratic women were expected to remain quiet and obedient. She sought real connection in a world obsessed with appearances and pursued passion in a society that discouraged it. While shocking to many, it made her rare, a woman controlling her own narrative. By the 1930s, the Mountbattens had largely abandoned the idea of a traditional marriage. Rather than falling apart, their relationship reshaped itself over time. Edwina Mountbatten had lovers, some lasting many years, while Louis Mountbatten also had companions. Yet they continually returned to each other, to host social functions, travel together, raise their children, plan important decisions, and maintain the carefully constructed image of a modern aristocratic marriage. Beneath that public image, however, a deeper change was happening, one that would soon take Edwina away from London's elite social world and into the intense reality of World War II. As the 1930s moved closer to war, Edwina had become a permanent figure in British high society, admired and discussed in equal measure. Her marriage had settled into a calm partnership based on understanding, though emotionally she still felt unsettled. The scandals connected to her name had faded but never completely disappeared. The press gave her more distance, yet internally she remained restless. Then in 1939, everything changed as Britain entered war against Germany. In the middle of global chaos, Edwina discovered something she had never truly experienced before: real purpose. When war was declared, Edwina did not withdraw to a country estate or hide behind her aristocratic title. Instead, she did something unexpected and bold. She stepped forward decisively and joined the St. John Ambulance Brigade, an organization she had already supported. This time she did far more than lend her name. She became fully active and quickly rose to become superintendent and chief, directing tens of thousands of volunteers across Britain and colonial territories. While many women of her social class supported the war effort from a distance, Edwina worked directly on the ground, wearing uniform and facing the same dangers as nurses, medics, and ambulance drivers. She proved exceptionally capable, showing natural leadership, strong organization, and calmness during crisis. She coordinated complicated relief operations across bombed cities, especially in London, helping evacuate children, assist injured civilians, and organize mobile hospitals during constant air raids. People working beside her were often shocked. Was this the same woman once known for glamour and gossip columns? Instead of vanity or distance, they saw stamina, skill, and genuine leadership. She helped operate hospitals, spent hours comforting wounded soldiers, wrote letters for them, and pushed for better care standards. She became known for her relentless attention to logistics, supply trains, medical barracks, and mobile food units. She seemed to be everywhere at once. For the first time, her life was not about reputation. She was building her own legacy in wartime history. This change was not a public relations performance. It was genuine, driven by a long-standing need to feel useful and connected. War gave her that meaning in ways wealth and relationships never had. War also brought trauma. Her journals show growing emotional weight as she witnessed horrors, burned children, grieving mothers, and dying young soldiers. Instead of stepping back, she moved closer to danger. She traveled beyond Britain, visiting field hospitals and refugee camps in North Africa, the Middle East, and India, often in risky environments. Meanwhile, Louis Mountbatten rose in military importance, eventually becoming Supreme Allied Commander in Southeast Asia. While he advanced in rank, Edwina built her own identity as a wartime leader. Publicly, they still appeared united, writing supportive letters and attending events together. Gradually, public opinion shifted. Once seen as scandalous, the Mountbattens were now respected for wartime service. Edwina's work expanded beyond medicine into civilian evacuation planning. She helped families find safe shelter during bombings, visited prisoner-of-war camps, supported mental health programs for returning soldiers, and challenged government failures regarding civilian protection. She transformed from glamorous hostess into a respected humanitarian commander. Despite her achievements, criticism remained. Some officials resented her aristocratic background. Others believed her role existed only because of her husband's influence. But colleagues who worked with her saw a woman who broke class and gender expectations and transformed herself into what many described as a soldier of mercy. She did not seek awards or publicity. What she wanted most was to feel necessary, and she finally did. By 1945, she was no longer a secondary figure in history. She had become a major force. Her marriage survived, though it had evolved into partnership rather than romance. She and Louis grew closer through shared wartime experiences and mutual respect. The world she returned to after the war was changing. The British Empire was weakening, aristocratic power was fading, and society was being forced to face a new reality. Edwina had no intention of returning to her old life. She was about to enter an even more complex political and personal chapter. In 1947, as the British Empire declined, Louis Mountbatten was appointed the last Viceroy of India, responsible for overseeing the partition of British India. He was chosen for his royal connections, military experience, and ability to manage a difficult transition. Edwina accompanied him, now older, shaped by war, and determined to make a difference. They arrived in India during extreme tension. The country was not only approaching independence but also violent division. Religious conflict between communities erupted into riots. Millions were displaced. Fear and anger filled the atmosphere. For Edwina, this was another humanitarian battlefield. She refused to act as a decorative figure. She traveled across the subcontinent, often with minimal staff, visiting refugee camps, treating injured civilians, and fighting for food and medical resources. In New Delhi, she met Jawaharlal Nehru, leader of the Indian National Congress. He was already a legendary political figure, highly educated, deeply intellectual, and fiercely nationalist. Though imprisoned by British authorities in the past, he carried little personal bitterness. His presence was calm, intelligent, and magnetic. From their first meeting, a quiet bond formed, not dramatic or reckless, but built on understanding. Though they came from completely different worlds, they recognized shared feelings of loneliness, exhaustion, and determination to help others. Their relationship deepened through meetings, walks, and private letters. Historians still debate whether their bond was purely intellectual or romantic. The truth likely exists somewhere between. What is certain is that they deeply cared for each other. Louis Mountbatten knew of their connection and accepted it. Their marriage had already moved beyond traditional boundaries. This relationship developed during India's darkest period. When independence came in 1947, it came with partition, the creation of Pakistan. Violence exploded. Refugee trains were attacked. Villages were destroyed. Nearly 1 million people died, and more than 15 million were displaced. Edwina was deeply affected. She worked in refugee camps and hospitals filled with starving civilians, injured women, and orphan children. She helped coordinate aid tirelessly. Nehru often worked alongside her. Together, they stood simply as two people witnessing human suffering. India permanently changed Edwina. It removed the last layers of aristocratic distance and reshaped her into a global humanitarian figure. Her connection with Nehru was not simply scandal, it represented transformation. He helped her see the world beyond empire, while she offered him emotional support during immense political pressure. Even after returning to England in 1948, they continued exchanging letters filled with warmth and emotional closeness. Publicly, Edwina received honors for her work. Privately, she carried emotional wounds from witnessing partition violence and from the quiet pain of separation from Nehru. Though they would meet again during diplomatic visits, the intensity of their time in India could never truly be recreated. As the British Empire receded, Edwina no longer appeared as a symbol of colonial arrogance, but instead emerged as a figure of moral complexity, a woman who entered India as a vicereine and left as something far more profound, a witness, a partner in grief, and a friend to a nation in labor. Still, many couldn't accept it. Publicly, Edwina received honors and accolades for her service in India, yet privately she carried scars from both the horrors of partition and the quiet ache of being separated from New. Even though they would see each other again during diplomatic visits, the intensity of their time in India could never truly be recreated. As the British Empire receded, Edwina emerged not as a symbol of colonial arrogance but as a figure of moral complexity, a woman who entered India as a vicereine and left as something far more profound, a witness, a partner in grief, and a friend to a nation in labor. And still many couldn't accept it. British tabloids whispered, Indian politicians speculated, and the press circled the Nehru-Mountbatten relationship with both fascination and suspicion. Yet neither Edwina nor New gave them anything. They never spoke publicly about their bond. They protected it fiercely. In one of her final interviews, Edwina once said, "There are some relationships that don't need to be explained, only lived." India had changed her forever, not through scandal, but through truth, through pain, through love, and through a realization that beneath all the uniforms, the pearls, and the politics, she had found the one connection that made her feel whole. And above all, that was the true scandal, that a woman so misunderstood by history may have finally found her soul's counterpart in the most unlikely place imaginable. But time always moves on. In the years that followed, Edwina continued traveling the world, quietly working for the Red Cross, aiding refugees, and delivering medical supplies. Yet no experience, no person, and no mission ever touched her again the way India or New had. The years following Edwina Mountbatten's return from India were quieter, but never idle. Though she was no longer in the spotlight of empire, she did not slow down. Instead, she redirected her energy toward a new kind of purpose, global humanitarian work. In war-torn regions of Southeast Asia and Africa, Edwina could often be found without fanfare, coordinating medical shipments, visiting remote hospitals, and speaking with refugees. Her name still opened doors, but it was her determination, not her title, that kept them open to the British public. She had now become a respected figure, transformed from the once notorious socialite into a dignified humanitarian. The scandals of her youth faded, replaced by headlines praising her tireless service and compassion. She no longer craved attention. She had found contentment in service. Yet one thread still tied her to the world she had once shaken so deeply, Javor knew. Their relationship, though now mostly long-distance, endured. The letters between them continued, less frequent perhaps, but no less heartfelt. Whenever their paths crossed during official visits or international conferences, there was familiarity and a deep, unspoken understanding. Neither needed grand declarations. The connection had already been sealed, etched into the silences between their words. In public, they were cordial, warm, and appropriate. In private, they remained each other's quiet solace. By the late 1950s, Edwina was traveling extensively for the St. John Ambulance Brigade and the Red Cross, often under physically punishing conditions. She ignored warnings from friends and doctors who urged her to rest. But she was never one to slow down, not for age, not for illness, and certainly not for appearances. In February 1960, Edwina departed for yet another mission, this time to North Borneo, modern-day Malaysia. The conditions were humid, remote, and physically draining, typical of her dedication. She insisted on visiting every medical unit in the region. Those who met her there remembered a woman who, despite looking physically fragile, commanded every room with grace and quiet authority. Then, on February 21st, in the early hours of the morning, Edwina Mountbatten died in her sleep. The cause was reported as heart failure. She was 58 years old. Her body was found in her bed, surrounded by letters, photographs, and personal keepsakes, including several from Jawaharlal Nehru. News of her death rippled through Britain, but in India it struck like a storm. When Nero was informed, he was shattered. Those close to him said he received the news in silence, retreating into his study for hours. Aides reported seeing him weep. For a man known for composure, his grief was raw and visible. Then came a gesture that stunned even his closest colleagues. Nehru requested that Edwina Mountbatten's body be buried at sea from an Indian Navy vessel, a highly symbolic act of honor. The Indian Navy ship insists Trichel carried her coffin into the Indian Ocean, where sailors, many of whom she had once comforted and helped during the partition crisis, laid her to rest in a solemn ceremony. It was as if the sea became their final meeting place, a quiet farewell between two souls who had shared a private, unshakable bond amid the noise of politics and history. Louis Mountbatten, dignified in mourning, accepted New's gesture with quiet respect. He knew what Edwina had meant to New, and perhaps what New had meant to her. At her funeral, Louis is said to have stood silently, tears in his eyes, watching as the sea took his wife, not with resentment, but with reverence. In her will, Edwina requested no grand memorial, no ornate gravestone, just the sea, just silence. In that silence, she left behind one of the most powerful, complex, and misunderstood legacies of her era. Edwina Mountbatten had lived many lives, a glittering debutante, a scandalous aristocrat, a restless wife, a bold humanitarian, and a woman who dared to feel deeply in a world that demanded restraint. She defied labels, broke rules, and most of all reclaimed her narrative in an age when women of her class were rarely allowed to write their own. To some, she remains a controversial figure remembered for rumors, wealth, and unconventional choices. To others, she is a symbol of resilience and reinvention, a woman who used her privilege to serve rather than simply to shine. Her love for New remains one of history's most whispered romances, rarely written in official accounts yet deeply felt in the margins of letters and memories. Though we may never know the full nature of their bond, we know this: it changed both of them. It changed how they saw power, service, and the world. Today, Edwina Mountbatten's name is a footnote in most history books, overshadowed by her husband's title, reduced to rumors, and often misunderstood. But if you look closely, beneath the headlines and behind the whispers, you will find a woman who burned brighter than the empire she served. A woman who made mistakes, yes, but also made a difference. She died far from home, but she died in purpose. And in the quiet waters of the Indian Ocean, she found a final peace that eluded her in life. That is the untold story of Lady Edwina Mountbatten. When Edwina Mountbatten's ashes were scattered into the Indian Ocean from the decks of an Indian Navy ship, it was meant to be a quiet, dignified farewell. But what followed in the months and years after her passing was anything but silent. Her death didn't end the conversation, it amplified it. For those who had known her closely, grief was immediate. For those who had judged her from afar, curiosity returned. And for historians, biographers, and royal watchers alike, Lady Edwina's story became a puzzle that refused to fit neatly into any single narrative. To the British establishment, Edwina's passing was handled as a formal matter. Statements were issued, tributes were made, and honors were posthumously acknowledged. She was praised for her service during World War II, her humanitarian leadership, and her unwavering commitment during the blood-soaked days of Indian partition. But what was never officially mentioned was her deep and enduring bond with New, or the fact that India had ultimately claimed her as one of its own. That chapter was too complex, too emotionally charged, and perhaps too inconvenient for imperial memory. Yet in India, her legacy took on a deeply personal meaning. Among the countless people she had helped, refugees, nurses, and children orphaned by partition, Edwina Mountbatten was remembered not as a foreign ruler's wife, but as a woman who stood beside them when so few others did. In medical outposts and dusty archives, her name still evoked gratitude. Against all odds, she built real relationships across borders, religions, and traumas. And then there was Javour New. In the years after her death, New continued leading a newly independent India through turbulent early years. He remained stoic in public and measured in his words, but those close to him noticed a change, a quietness that deepened after Edwina's passing. The woman who had once been his emotional refuge was gone, leaving a hollow he would never quite fill. Their letters, some of which later surfaced, painted a picture of mutual devotion rarely seen between such powerful figures. Nehru once wrote, "She was so much to me for so many years. She brought sweetness, understanding, and a strange peace I could not find elsewhere." He never elaborated publicly. But privately, Edwina's memory remained alive. He kept her letters. He reread them. And until his death in 1964, years after Edwin's, he never spoke of another woman the way he had spoken of her. Even Louis Mountbatten, stoic and proper as ever, carried on Edwina's legacy in his own way. In speeches and writings, he referred to her with warmth and respect. He acknowledged their unconventional marriage and separate lives, but never with bitterness. If anything, he seemed proud, quietly moved by what Edwina had become in her later years. When Louis himself was assassinated in 1979 by the IRA, it marked the end of an era, not just of one man, but of a strange partnership that had defied aristocratic convention, political expectations, and personal tragedy. Perhaps the most haunting part of Edwina's story is not how she lived or died, but how she has been misunderstood since. For decades, Edwina Mountbatten was portrayed as a footnote in royal biographies, often defined by scandals, affairs, or her husband's military career. Some called her reckless. Others dismissed her humanitarian work as an attempt at redemption. But these narratives missed the point entirely.